Welcome back. This is all very exciting. As you know, if you follow me on Facebook and YouTube, couldn't think of it then, kept thinking about Twitter, which I have nothing to do with because people seem to be very unpleasant on it. I have finished making all the bits for 2 of the chronograph kits, and I'm still thinking and umming and ahhing about whether to, just how easy or complicated to make them. And I then thought, well, I really do want to get on with Victoria the Automaton's enclosure. Really would like to, but I haven't got enough wood. So, having rung the woodyard and got the distinct impression that they were unaware that there was a pandemic, I just thought, having been so careful over the last few months, that I really wasn't prepared to risk going there. So I spent a long time looking on the internet, and I have ordered the wood that I need for her enclosure, her Gothic arched enclosure. But that's not going to arrive until next week. So, during the meanwhile, dear friends, what I'm going to start doing is to make 2 more Climatic Revelators. Now that's really exciting for several reasons. One of them being that I'm so useless with business sense and business acumen that I was sort of thinking, why aren't I selling any more of the wall mounting machines, the slightly more expensive ones? And I used to sell them, the vast majority of them, at steampunk events and fairs, and of course there haven't been any. The reason they were very popular at the events was, if I remember rightly, I would sell them for about £1,800 rather than £2,400 as a nice discount for those enthusiasts who would attend such events. Now, to lower the cost of the wall mounted machines to £1,800, as of course I haven't attended any steampunk events because of the pandemic. How ridiculous, you'd think I'd have realised it earlier. Anyway, those of you who have visited my website and Etsy shop and things will know that the Climatic Revelator, beautiful machine, it records barometric pressure. It then can display back the last 24 hours of barometric pressure readings on the gauge at the bottom at the flick of the control knob, and it will display a current weather forecast based on those last 24 hours of barometric pressure readings using one of 5 Victorian park scene silhouettes stored within a carousel. I love the way it moves, and I eventually worked it out. The carousel was the way forward with a mirror and a lens, and it just works so beautifully. Very, very pleased with it. The other thing, obviously that was too simple, and the direction is indicated audibly using 5 chimes that rotate. So if each hour, when it changes the weather forecast or lets you know what the weather forecast is, the chimes play a tune either rising or falling in pitch so that you can hear what the weather's doing. It's so exciting to be working on another couple of these. As always, I'm very keen to help people with their inventions and creations and to avoid pitfalls. Now, the first few wall mounting ones, in fact the only ones that I keep, the first version of each that I've still got hanging in my kitchen, I made using this very soft pine. This is part of a shelf that I got from IKEA because it was the cheapest way to get a large amount of engineered pine sheet. Engineered being, and this I can't show you on this because this hasn't got one of the examples, but basically they glue together lots of leftover small pieces of pine alternately, with the grain going one way, then the other way, then the other way, then the other way, so that overall it doesn't warp, it cancels itself out. Problem with that was that this pine grows very fast and is very porous, so it responds fairly accurately to changes in humidity. I just want it to focus on barometric pressure, but these machines do tend, as the weather gets more damp or dry, the whole machine changes shape slightly. It gets slightly larger or smaller, which is a little undesirable when you've got gears and things that have to mesh perfectly. And that's why, in the end, I went for ply. Because ply, lots of layers of veneer, glued together in alternating directions, so it's far more stable. lovely laser cutter, is to cut out some corner pieces, which I will then stick down. I've found that having, these are 3mm or 3.3mm thick ply. If I glue one of these or two of these in each corner, it will then provide support for the beading. But I've cut the hole in the ply so it just pushes in really nice and gives lots of additional support, as well as having 2 screws. And it will then sit flush once it's through 2 pieces of ply. And that's perfect because you can put a screw in the wall, hook these over, Bob's your uncle, funny's your aunt, works a treat. Another little top tip, constantly working on better ways of making these inventions. The 2 that hold the keyhole fixing, I've taken these little pinholes off. They really didn't work. It was so difficult because putting a pin into plywood, it's going to go left, right as it finds different grain directions and things, and it just really didn't work. If you use really good glue, it's absolutely fine. You can get it set up. Another use for the 2 V blocks, just to arrange it, push it down, put a nice weight on it. Hopefully it'll be glued in the right position. The next job I need to do is to cut the beading into with a mitre joint at each end. The way I personally enjoy doing it, dear friends, is to leave a bit extra either side and then just cut it roughly over length on the bandsaw. We line that up carefully with the corner of the wood that we need it to fit round, and then make a mark at the other end. And I'm trying to look through the viewfinder and it's getting very difficult, so roughly like that. Hopefully it'll just line up perfectly with the corners. I'll do the rest of them and then get back to you. It's the next morning and the beading has dried, and in the end I just hammered in the veneer pins just to fill the holes basically. So we've got the back 2 holes ready for the keyhole hangers, the front all nice and smooth. So I'm now going to stain them. Put 2 coats of the stain varnish stuff on. Did the back bits just to make it look neat and tidy, and I've just buffed it up, and I try and get to the, oh look at that, it's just so beautiful. I love wood, it's brilliant. You got little twiddly bits around the edge, fantastic. So I've got 2 of them finished. Now to start cutting out to the carousel. And by the way, just for reference, in case you want to stain some wood, the old stuff you used to get, which had very stinky thinners, you can't get anymore because it had loads of damaging things for the environment. This is now called wood dye, and this is what I found is really good, especially having discovered I was doing it all wrong for ages, because unlike the original wood stain that you'd put on a piece of raw piece of untreated wood, you put it on paint it on a piece of untreated wood, let it soak in for a couple of minutes and then wipe off any excess. So this is what I've been dutifully doing, and wondering why it didn't give quite such a nice dark sheen to it. And then I read the instructions, or accidentally did it, and found that it is brilliant. 2 coats of this after each one dries, and then buff it, and it's just lovely. Anywho, so here's the top and bottom of the carousel cut out of, theoretically, cut out of 3mm acrylic. There's the top, and as you can see I've also added, can you see, also got it to engrave using a lower power cut, the twiddly bits. I'm sure it's clearer than that, yeah, there we are. And the slots, 5mm slots to support the graphics, the cutaway scenes. There's also a cunning bit waste not, want not. Here's the base of it that goes in the middle. These three strange holes here will become apparent later in the process. They just fit the chuck on my lathe, so I can grip this and glue bits together and make sure it's all centered and stuff like that. That's the purpose for them. These little slots around here are for magnets to work the reed relays so that it knows where it is pointing, and obviously there's the nice gear around the outside to drive it. Lovely. Just starting to cut out bearing supports, which, to save plastic, I've built into the windows that the light shines through into the carousel. And the wonderful thing about being able to set the laser on different powers with each drawing is that, as you can see, I've got screw heads. We go and have a look at its cutting. You can see, because of the order, it's engraving all of the screw heads first. It's such a useful thing to be able to do. And then once it's engraved all of those, and that's, I think, at a power of 40 millimeters a second at 15, I think, and it just is enough not to cut too deeply, but to give a really nice effect that does look just like screw holes. And then once it's cut out, engraved, or whatever you want to call it, then it'll cut out the centre bits. And as I say, I've designed it so that the middles of each window, the hole where the window will go, creates the part of the bearing supports for the carousel. Having checked my copious notes, brilliant, so you have a bearing at the top, a bearing underneath, and a nice big distance, quite a large distance, between the two, so that the carousel can't wobble around too much. Brilliant. I think I'll fix this, drill it out, fix it together, and then make the drive shafts from brass. Brilliant, there we have it, two of these. Threaded M4 hole in one end, so I can screw the mirror holder on and hold the bearings on. They slide on beautifully. And the idea with bearings like this, you have two as far apart as possible, because then you're very, very steady. There's very, very little movement in any direction other than round and round. That is going to fit inside. Here's one of these ones which I'll push the bearings in, so that's going to push through, and at the top I'm going to have a spacer between the bearings, because otherwise if you tighten them down, it'll then crush them and you'll start creating other forces, unwanted ones. So generally you have a spacer, the exact length between these two bearings. That then takes any force, washer on there, the mirror holder on here, and hopefully it will turn beautifully. Here's the brass support that supports the centre race of the bottom bearing. Then there's the spacer that doesn't have to spin, doesn't have to do anything, it just has to clamp down on the centre races. Then, completely uncalculated properly, you know, like I say, not having had any steampunk fairs to go to and received orders for these larger machines, I've forgotten what I'm meant to be doing. Then of course you can have a washer and a brass screw. This is just a temporary one, but the original one will be much longer and will support the mirror. I will explain that in a later video, but you can now tighten this really tightly, and because it's bearing down, literally forcing the two centre races together, it doesn't have any effect on the outer. And then you have the joy of watching something like that. And if you're not into engineering, you've never experienced this, may not really appreciate it, but there is something very special about creating something with bearings that just spin so freely. It's absolutely lovely, fabulous. Now I can get on and start assembling all these exciting parts to build the carousels.